What makes it complicated for these singles to find their bashert, as we call it in the Galus, is this in-between place to some extent. That is, secular people or Chiloni people who also aspire for these same things, for the same kind of intimacy within marriage, at the same time drift easily into relationships because they're not constantly thinking, is this a person for me, is this not? They begin hanging out, they begin maybe, eventually having sex, maybe move in with each other, and only after a while ask themselves, okay, are we continuing with this for the rest of our lives? And that kind of helps them make that leap, the leap of faith, because they're there anyhow and they're living it. With the religious Zionists, they're in some kind of weird in-between situation, where on the one hand they do have these expectations of understanding each other, of with all what psychology has influenced greatly society in general. We don't realize it sometimes to what extent we're products of that. So with all of that, with all the way we think about, again, sexuality, etc., etc. But on the other hand, when they date, often on a second or third date, they're already thinking, is this a person for me or is this not the person for me? And they definitely don't flow easily into a situation where they're living with someone because they don't live with someone in principle. Very few religious people actually do that. So, in a way, how do I explain this well? What the expectations regarding relationships include everything that now a Chiloni or just whatever gender couple expects about relationships. But the experiencing of regular life doesn't happen while you're dating. While you're dating in religious Zionism, you're still constantly, we're going out, okay, for a month now, 2 months, and it doesn't include living together, and we have to decide what's going on with us. And it's this that in some ways makes their situation, their plight more difficult, in my opinion, than that of of the Israelis who are not religious. This is my partial maybe explanation for the rising numbers of singles. Now singlehood impacts the religiosity, religious life of the singles. This is not, by the way, an obvious thing. Of course, if we ask somebody who's not religious how singlehood impacted his religiosity, he's likely to say it did not at all. And this is part of what makes this an interesting issue to study, because it does. And a reason it impacts is, as I've mentioned, because religion is considered such a family issue. And to some extent, being single and religious is an anomaly. People often feel even cognitive dissonance. How could it be that I'm this age? How could it be that I'm alone for Chag, Shabbat, etc.? So of course the tension is there. Now, for the singles themselves, they're influenced most if we're going to measure it, so to speak, in sins, or according to what Orthodox Judaism are sins. The area that's the most obvious has to do with gender relations and sexuality, of course, with a majority past a certain age just transgressing what halacha says on these things on different levels, regardless of where they stand. But past a certain age, past 35, say, it's only a minority, very small minority, even who actually uphold halacha completely. And this is, by the way, true much more so even for divorcees, for religious divorcees. Usually, and this is an interesting point, they themselves see this as completely related to their singlehood. And so when they, so to speak, return to normative Judaism, meaning that they become married, they go back onto the path. They at least claim that they will return to their earlier level of observance. In fact, this doesn't always occur 100%. So if a yeshiva bacher had once never dreamt of going swimming in mixed beaches, and then eventually as a single he did, often when he remarries he won't necessarily return to separate swimming. So this is part of the process. There are some other areas of religious behavior that are affected as well. Some men have told me about how they daven much less, or daven in minyan much less, and they themselves at least thought this had to do with being single. They thought that if they were in a community with a wife, and they didn't get up for minyan, the community, the wife, somebody would make an issue of it. And here they're on their own. Some even related to being depressed. One man, for example, told me how just being single leaves him so depleted and so depressed that he doesn't have the strength for praying, but he definitely expects to return to that once he marries. Since he hasn't married yet, it's too early to see whether he in fact returned. But Whether it's correct or incorrect, singles often do relate their lax observance to being single. And to some extent, this whole situation does affect religious society, because first of all, the singles are quite a large group. We're talking, between the ages of 30 and 40, around 10% of religious Zionists are single. So that's quite a large group there. And younger, 25 to 30, is even much more, like 25%. So standards, religious standards are affected at some point, and as I mentioned, even once they get married, they often don't go back to this exact standard.